Ceará Global 2020, The Future in 360 Degrees, an event that's totally online, innovative, and done with co-creation, brought to you by the Chamber of Commerce and Foreign Investments and Brazil and Portugal Chamber of Commerce in Ceará, sponsorship from ADESE, AECIP, APSV Advogados, House of Representatives of the State of Ceará, BF Fortship, Banco do Nordeste, Bugaboo Studio, Café Santa Clara, FIEC, QUER, Sebrae Ceará, SB Combustíveis, and Fortaleza University Unifor Edson Queiroz Foundation, co-sponsorship from Secretariat of Tourism of the State of Ceará, support from Casa Azul Ventures, Elephant Co-working, Federation of the Chambers of Commerce, Brazil Africa Institute, JUSEC, Mango Ventures Brazil, Observatory France, Trends CE, Vetor, Brands and Patents, Wins for Future, institutional support from Apex Brasil, FEC Comércio Ceará, and Complexo do Pecém, technological support from Mob Telecom, iProject TI, TAPE, organized by Prática Eventos and Move On, media partner Grupo O Povo. We're back with our program for 2020. I hope that you're having a good time and getting to know a little bit about Fortaleza in this virtual tour. And now let's go to the panel, Fishing and Aquaculture in Ceará, From Tradition to a New World. All right, good afternoon to all of the participants in Ceará Global 2020. Future in 360 degrees. So first I'd like to thank the organizers of the event for the invitation in order to mediate this debate where we're going to talk about fishing and aquaculture, talking a little bit about this project Ceará Global to debate internationalization of Ceará's economy. So the topic or the theme of the event, the future in 360 degrees, we're going to talk about foreign trade, attraction of foreign investments, international cooperation, sustainable development. And so with the idea of showing Ceará that's connected to different markets around the world, and because of the track record that we have in our state in the production of fish, and so it's important for our economy. So we're going to talk about fishing and aquaculture in the state of Ceará, from tradition to the new world. And so in this panel, we're going to talk about seafood production, consumption, challenges for the sector, amongst other relevant topics. So I'm Professor Bartolomeu from the Fishing Department in the Federal University of Ceará. And we have here with us today Dr. Felipe Matias, who's engineer and chief researcher in aquaculture for FUNCAP and volunteer researcher in the post-grad program. And also Cadu Villaça from the trade union of fishing and aquaculture. So good afternoon, Cadu. Good afternoon, Felipe. To begin our talk here, to begin our panel, I'd like for each one of you to share with us your experience in fishing and aquaculture. I know that you're very well known in the industry, but those investors or those participants that are listening to you now who don't know you, I pass the floor over to Felipe and after to Cadu. First of all, I'd like to thank for the invitation. It's a great honor to be here with Professor Bartolomeu and Cadu. People who represent very well fishing and aquaculture industries in Ceará, Bartolomeu through the university, and Cadu, the private sector. So, my name is Felipe Matias. I'm a fishing engineer. I have an MBA in business management, a master's and doctorate in aquaculture. During 7 years, I was national secretary for aquaculture at the Ministry of Fisheries, and after executive secretary in the Network of Aquaculture for the Americas, FAO, from the UN, that takes care of food and agriculture. And so I have 25 years of experience in the industry. And this time I had the opportunity of visiting all the states in Brazil and more than 30 countries, always working with aquaculture. And so I'm very, very satisfied to be able to have this debate, this exchange of ideas, this whole discussion here in my state in Ceará. That's such a pioneering state. Ceará has so many potential for a future business in fisheries. Good afternoon. I'd also like to thank the organizers for the opportunity. And so my background is oceanography, 35 years ago, and my whole life I've dedicated myself to fishing. In the beginning, I worked as a crew member on ships, on fishing ships, shipping vessels, especially in the south of Brazil. But also after I came to the Northeast in 2007 in order to manage a company in the state of Ceará, and I fell in love. Since the first time I arrived here, I was very impressed. The energy, the strength, and the huge potential that Ceará has. And so we see more and more the wealth and the possibilities to exploit this wealth. Here in the state of Ceará, migratory resources, local resources, and we're working in this sense because fishing is always related to underdevelopment. When we talk about fishermen, people always believe it's a marginal activity or a second source of income. But we hope that we're going to raise the bar of this activity. We're going to take this activity as a true social and economic function. And so I'd like to now talk to Felipe. Felipe, could you tell us a little bit, give us an overview, if you will, of world production in fishing and aquaculture, and how is the state of Ceará in the world scenario? FAO is the organization that collects all the statistical data for aquaculture and fishing throughout the world. And recently, in June, they published the latest data, SOFIA 2020, with world fish production. And this information shows a trend that we've been seeing the last 20 years, really. We had a production of 168 million tons of fish products in the world. Of these 168, 156 million tons were for human consumption. We have something around 20 million tons that are not for human consumption. It's for oils or animal feed. And so we have millions of tons for human consumption. And aquaculture has already produced 82 million tons of this total, which is 52%, more than half. In other words, what does this mean, really? More than half of what we consume in fish products in the world is from fish farms, from aquaculture. So this is a trend in the world. We don't hunt animals anymore. You raise them. And in the case of fish, we do sort of hunt, which is fishing. And we're still going to fish during many years because of the socioeconomic importance that fishing has. But more and more, the supply of fish products in the world will be offered through aquaculture. We don't have major stocks, and of course Cadu has more know-how than myself, but we don't have huge fish stocks to be discovered that can increase the supply of fish products. But in the case of aquaculture, yes. So what's been happening is that human beings have been consuming more and more fish. We had a record once again. Every 2 years we break a record in the consumption of fish products, and FAO recorded a new record with 20.5 kilos per inhabitant per year. And on the other hand, if we're consuming more fish and seafood, the supply has been done through aquaculture in its different ways. Aquaculture today is a business that represents more than $260 billion US. And so it's a business that sometimes people don't understand the dimensions. The international trade for fish products represents 50.3% of the trade of animal protein, more than poultry and pork. And so international trade for fishing and aquaculture is extremely important, socioeconomically speaking, in the world and in Brazil and here in Ceará. Here in the state of Ceará, recently we had a drop in our production, and we're trying to revamp our development. In aquaculture, we have production of tilapia and shrimp, and now we are reorganizing aquaculture production. Okay, I'd like to pass the floor to Cadu so he could talk to us quickly about fish production in Ceará regarding since fishing, that moment where the fish arrives at the ports, all the way to certified exporters, the certified industries. First of all, I'd like to say that the state of Ceará, geographically speaking, is very equatorial, and so the state of Ceará is located in low productivity waters. This is normal. That has to do with physical and chemical oceanography. The productivity, the yield of this water around the equatorial world is usually low. I don't know if this is associated to some other phenomena, but anyway, these waters, however, have a lot of diversity. And in the state of Ceará, we can highlight lobster and other species that in volume perhaps is not so important, but there's a lot of value because these are fish products for that are with high added value, internationally and nationally speaking. Now, what happens is that fishermen from the state of Ceará, those that we see, that get on their fishing rafts, 3 or 4 fishermen on a fishing raft, on a jangada, and they go to fish. It's a limited reach because of natural reasons and also safety and security. So they don't go very far from the coast, perhaps 4 miles from the coast. And so that's quite associated to the recruitment of these resources, which is the young species. And so also what's always quite beautiful, what's impressive, the fishing practice known as currais. So it's a system that's been around for hundreds and hundreds of years, this tradition of using the currais. And they get exceptional yield on a beach overnight. And so this is very beautiful, I think. There's a lot of history behind this activity, and it's really quite beautiful. However, and this is the major gap, and it's not only with Ceará, this is actually throughout Brazil, and even the region, all of Latin America suffers from this. It's an activity that's quite informal. We don't have a lot of data. We don't have a lot of information. And so it's difficult to size the market, to compare. I mean, we always work with macro data, like Felipe just mentioned, from FAO, the recent Sophia. Every 2 years, they update this publication. But in aquaculture, it's more business-oriented. And fishing is still quite empirical, if you will. But anyway, what's happening is that the markets are maturing. The European markets, the American market, today they demand sustainability policies, and consumers, they want to know what are they eating and how did this product end up on my table. And so this whole journey is being questioned with traceability and sustainability, and so that's why we need records, we need information in the market. This is a new reality in the market, and we're quite interested in this. This is something very modern, and we're trying to obtain certification. It's not an easy way there. The first step for anyone to obtain certification is governance, which comes from the government. So to have clear standards, enforcement, and we're still trying. But we believe in this. We're investing, we're dedicating ourselves, our efforts, so that certification can become a reality and no longer a dream. Yeah, you talked about production and consumption in the world, and we've been breaking records year after year. Felipe highlighted this very well. Now, I would like for each one of you to talk a little bit about production and consumption by different populations, and what daily habits should be encouraged and stimulated. Well, production of fish is something fascinating, because if on the one hand we're able to offer a nutritional food that's good quality, because human beings are consuming more and more fish and seafood. Why? Because they want healthy eating, and so people see fish as healthy food, and so this healthy food, we have a true epidemic with obesity, overweight, and so for people that are obese, those that are overweight, to have a balanced meal, healthy eating is interesting. So if people start to consume more fish and seafood. On the other hand, fish is a huge source of protein. So for people who are malnourished or undernourished, fish are also interesting, because it's going to provide them with the necessary protein that the human body needs. And so fish can meet these two needs, nutritional needs, for those that are obese or overweight, and those that have nutritional deficiencies. And so these facts, together with the increase in income that we're seeing, or at least that we were seeing in most countries in the last 10 or 20 years, made it so that people have a greater income and consume more goods, and amongst these goods, more food, and more quality food, and food that they consider healthy. And so that's where we have this records in fish consumption. And it's interesting because we can supply both sources. And furthermore, there's another fact in the case of fish production via aquaculture. It's a major agribusiness. I mean, if on the one hand, we have a major agribusiness with production of commodities like tilapia, like shrimp farming or salmon farming, that is very important economically for many companies. But on the other hand, we have other products, like, for example, tilapia from 200, 300 grams that's consumed in Latin America and in Africa. And this use is more to alleviate hunger and poverty. And so we have, on the one hand, a focus on agribusiness, and on the other hand, to try alleviate poverty and hunger. And so it's great to have this activity that has to do with all of this, and that's why it's been developing so much in the last few years, not only in the world, but also here in Brazil. Excellent, Felipe. And the diversity of new products, new fishing products. Cadu, please go ahead. Yeah, I think what Felipe mentioned really puts things into context. I'd like to talk a little bit about habits. This is something that we're working on, and it's quite curious and interesting. The trade union, a project for the improvement of lobster fishing. We've been trying to deal with all of this, and there's a habit that we were able to change. Pre-pandemic last year, a law was published and so it's interesting because prohibiting the commercialization of lobster by restaurants, hotels, and markets the last 3 months of the breeding season, because what we've been seeing is that really the breeding season is not respected. So many still fish during this period and try to obtain financial advantages with this. But the best way is for tourism, the national market. I want to buy lobster. I want to eat lobster in Ceará. It's important that in people's habits, daily habits, people be aware that perhaps it's the reproduction, the breeding season, and this commercialization is not authorized. And then we've been talking to different associations of restaurants and chefs, and it's interesting. That's an opportunity that we've seen to have greater communication about these commercial restrictions, and that's something good, not bad. And consumers need to understand this, read this in a menu, for example, and understand, it's awareness raising. Yeah, sustainable consumption. Yeah, sustainable consumption, exactly. Right. Now, a next round of questions for Felipe. Felipe, we know that the digital era, the influence of this era that we're going through in society connects you to more information. The world knocks down borders, facilitates our work, and also changes the way we do business, right? Empowering companies with big data, networks. And so, in this light, how do you see the digital revolution and technological innovation, how they can and have been influencing aquaculture? Yeah, thank you for your question, because I've been working a lot on this in these last 4 or 5 years. I usually say that we produce fish to make money because people eat fish, and that's going to continue during a long time. People are going to continue consuming fish and seafood to eat. However, there is a new infinity of new products from fish that the state of Ceará and Brazil needs to pay attention to. I'll give you a very clear example of this. The Federal University of Ceará developed a technique to treat burnt patients from tilapia skin. This wasn't done in China or Norway or in the United States. This was done here in the state of Ceará at the Federal University of Ceará. So with this example, we have many others. For many years, we developed a technique that revolutionized fish farming. And so we're quite pioneer in this area. But now, this data revolution, artificial intelligence, big data, Internet of Things, all of this has brought about a huge transformation in aquaculture and fishing. And that's what I've been doing the last few years. That's what I've been researching. I've identified a lot of innovation that's revolutionizing. For example, in Norway, there is a laser beam that treats salmon from different types of parasites. So there are some byproducts from microalgae. That's biotechnology. And these byproducts, in 1 gram, it costs hundreds of dollars. And so instead of only being concerned in producing quantity or tons, we also need to produce grams with high added value. I was in Israel in 2015 and I saw algae called Hematococcus pluvialis, where you extract a substance, and we have a project at the university, and together with the Secretariat of Agricultural Development, for Hematococcus pluvialis to extract the substance, which is an antioxidant. And with this, just like this, there are many other byproducts that we need to pay attention to be pioneers. And I've proposed, I've been saying that FIEC, that the state, that the private sector, academia, we need to work in the center called Innovaqua. It's the center of identification of new technologies, the creation of new technologies, and dissemination of new technology. And I can give you many examples: drones, sensors to measure the quality of soil and water. These are examples of new businesses from fishing or for fishing that we need to pay attention to. And so this type of work, and there's a huge obstacle, technological innovation. People have a certain resistance for shrimp farming, for example. It's semi-intensive. Today, with a yield of 2 tons per hectare, or 3 tons per hectare, or maybe 5 tons per hectare, let's say. And while we have a super intensive harvesting 100 tons per hectare, and we're not able to change this technology because of some barriers, some obstacles. So it's the role of the state to develop this, to show to the private sector that this is good business. If we change this technology, this system of shrimp farming in Ceará, shrimp farming is around 1 billion reais without increasing 1 hectare, with water reuse, and also going more towards the hinterland, we can go from 1 billion to 12 billion reais. And so we need to change. Aquaculture has been going through a turning point. It's the new aquaculture. So these new businesses we need to develop in the near future. That's excellent. Thank you, Felipe. Now I pass the floor over to Cadu. A question for you, Cadu, to talk to us a little bit more about fishing. Cadu, we know that the coast of Ceará, like you mentioned, is rich in some fishing resources like lobster and perhaps grouper. And so could you talk to us a little bit more about these main resources, these fishing resources that we exploit on our coast, and perhaps some information regarding volumes in terms of specialized labor, jobs? Really, the major champion is the lobster. Lobsters. And always thinking about live weight in Brazil, 6,000 tons, 6,500, 6,700, but let's say 6,000 on average. This has been the average for the last 5-6 years that we've been monitoring closely. The state of Ceará represents 4,000. And so the state of Ceará always has 60-70% of the production, of the national production for lobster. But what's important, this measurement is done at the port, and we know the major production is in the state of Ceará. But Ceará's ships commonly go to the coast of Piauí, Maranhão, other neighboring states, even all the way to Amapá. But the major concentration really is still in our state. Red fish, such as grouper, was very important, and there was overfishing, but they're recovering now, apparently, starting to recover. It's also a high-level resource for exports. Smaller size, and the larger ones are for domestic consumption. And it's still very artisanal fishing with fishing lines, and in Belém they work with some traps, but Ceará, it's a fishing line, a fleet, perhaps 150 boats working with us. And it's interesting because a morphological characteristic that we have 4,000 meters below the surface, and this comes from the Fernando de Noronha chain, and so there's a lot of fish. It's an area for reproduction. They go to these deep banks to reproduce, and it maintains that population that's most exploited in the coast, from closer to the continental shelf. And other species like sirigado, for example, and here the redfish, just like the fish that's in the 100 real bill. That's the blue version. Here it's the red version. Perhaps Felipe can talk a little bit about this. But you see in aquaculture going towards these species. And so really, I think our great aptitude is there. And so we're in the semi-arid, and the sea is always a great option that we need to think about. And 2012 until now, but it's really interesting. Tuna. This is fish beyond the continental shelf, beyond 200 miles. So 200 miles and further on. Really interesting, began in 2012, and 20,000 tons. And so, like in El Dorado, the growth is not very organized. And recently, and thanks to tuna, because tuna is protected by ICAT, an international convention. And so these migratory stocks are done by this entity, this from Madrid. And 2-3 years, we haven't produced a lot of information. Tuna has a very well-established level, and 3,000, 5,000, 15,000 tons. And then we needed to stop, and we're going through this process. And we estimate 250 licenses for the northeast of Brazil, perhaps 200 in the state of Ceará, a little bit in Rio Grande do Norte, but the major concentration, I think, will be here. And it's a resource that's also quite interesting because allows for sashimi, but also during the pandemic, a canned product is interesting, ready for consumption, doesn't require energy for maintenance. There's a long shelf life for canned tuna you can buy, and after 1 year, it's still okay. It's very practical way of consuming this rich protein that comes from tuna. And so I think, in summary, tuna fishing in Ceará is a huge potential that we have. not producing exactly the way we're producing today. It's really just for industry, and there's a market niche for sashimi where there's a lot of added value, and usually, it depends on the manipulation or the handling, and there's a lot of demand. There's a huge demand. So tuna is this. 200 boats with 7 or 8 crew members, an average of 10 tons, 12 tons of tuna every 15 days. Sometimes they stretch out to 20 days. It's interesting also to talk about this type of fishing. They work with the schools of fish, and they gather where there is shade. And so there is the Pirata project where we do monitoring, and so there are buoys with sensors, and these are areas that naturally attract these schools of fish, and so the ships go after these floating structures where you have tuna below, and then they fish the tuna there during the fishing season. Usually another boat stays close by, and then one ship stays, the other one goes back to the port with the fish. So they fish the schools of fish. This is a common practice for tuna. It's also important to mention, like you said, the care that you need to have with the raw material during fishing. Of course, this will extend this shelf life and will improve the quality of the product as well. Always need to be careful in fishing. And so we have another 2 rounds, okay? So I'd like to pass the floor back to Felipe. And I have a question for you. What are the main challenges and bottlenecks that the state of Ceará needs to overcome so that we can have a stronger aquaculture in the next few years? And the same topic for you, Cadu. How can we guarantee more safety and security to maintain production of fish production? Well, we do have some bottlenecks and challenges that we need to face actively. The first thing is the issue simplification of environmental licensing process. I always say in my talks that the frontier of aquaculture development has to do with environmental licensing. It needs to be quicker, and then we're going to develop our aquaculture easier. States that don't issue environmental licenses so easy have difficulties. The example of Mato Grosso, Rondônia, where 10 years ago they didn't even appear in the statistics. They're always amongst the 3 or 5 largest producers of aquaculture in the country. So we need to deal with an environmental legislation for aquaculture in our state, and not just resolutions. A lot of aquaculture has to do with resolutions from Coima or Conama here in the state. So you need to have a legal framework. And so I've proposed this to have this discussion in the House of Representatives, so we can have this discussion of a possible law for environmental licensing. I think that's the first bottleneck. And a second thing is so that we can really disseminate to growers this new aquaculture. We can no longer accept to work with 2 tons per hectare or 5 tons per hectare if there's already technology for 90 or 100 tons per hectare. It's not possible for us to work in a state that has water scarcity without planning for the reuse or very little use of water. And there is technology for this. So I believe that these two challenges, environmental licenses and new technologies, are very important. Yeah, we heard very well. It's like hunting. Fishing is like hunting. You go after animals. Now, sustainability means that you remove less than nature is able to recompose because of replacing its stocks. And so, we want to exploit as much as we want the natural resources, but you need to have the limit, the capacity to support of extraction. And this is something basic. You need to know the size of the stocks. You need to characterize that population or the populations, species that you want to use. And that's the major problem, I would say, the major bottleneck in Brazil. We're doing very little research to assess the fishing stocks. And so, really, through statistics and more data, and so we need to check this on the field. Oceanography, research and surveying, to know more about these resources in order to get to know this better. What we talk about, quotas, that's another thing. And also, it's important to talk about quotas, and so this is what established periods for reproduction and the quantity that you can fish. And with this, you allow population, the wild population, to control. You need to monitor this to see if it's working, but usually works quite well. Many fisheries are at the limits of their exploitation. It's a natural resource, so you exploit as much as you can, but always with precaution, knowing that you can have problems, like recently, of the oil spill, the recent oil spill. So what's the consequence of this in nature? We don't know. It's a major doubt, so we need to be very careful. But the secret is in knowledge, in science, in research. And on the other hand, society only looking and complaining and saying that the government doesn't do anything, is accusing. But society participates in this. When you go to Beira-Mar, when you go to the fish market, and so, yeah, this is fresh, this is from today, but it couldn't. It's prohibited. It's just not allowed. Also, lobster, so people buy it, but it's the wrong time of the year, and so we also have this responsibility as society to take care of these natural resources. Yeah, one last question, if you will. So possibly we're going to have investors listening to us, perhaps, and so Felipe, if you could talk to us, what Ceará has in terms of competitive advantage to attract new investors for fishing. And Cadu, I'd like to ask, what's the role of the federal government, state government, and municipal government in the development of public policies and in the reality of production? So if you can answer these questions. And final thoughts. Well, I think Ceará has some competitive advantages that are extremely important. regarding other neighboring states, or even from the south and southeast of Brazil. We have a postgrad program in fishing engineering. We have a tradition in production and consumption of fishing products. We're the largest consumers of tilapia in the country, regardless of the drop in our production. But consumption hasn't gone down, so other states are producing to sell here. That's what's happening. We are major exporters of fishing, grouper, and lobster. So all of this is in our vocation in Ceará. Our vocation for fishing, trade, and we need to explore this more and more. Now, in aquaculture, we have some advantages. This also has to do with tradition. We've been leaders in shrimp farming in the country. We need to change our technology, and this is a great opportunity for investors, I think. Investing in super intensive aquaculture, a system that has this yield of 100 tons per hectare. And this has been done in Rio Grande do Norte and Alagoas. Also, other forms for marine fish farming offshore, far from the coast, or with water recirculation, systems with water recirculation that are also being developed. Salmon in Florida. And so it's possible to produce some species with high technology. Anyway, these are all opportunities for investors who want to come. And there is what I think is the greatest difference, our strategic position, the logistics for the state today. It's very interesting for an investor to produce in the state of Ceará, to sell to Europe, to the United States, and to Asia, to China. We have Panama Canal. We're closer than the south and southeast of Brazil. We have tradition of exports to the United States, for example. So the logistics with the Pesca port is very, very attractive. And different institutions from the government, from private entities, the development of Porto do Pesca. We have the air hub, we have the tech hub with underwater fiber optic cables. All of this just is amazing. So, we have been investing in infrastructure, and this has become a competitive advantage. So investors who think in investing in fish production need to look at Ceará. And of course, new business, biotechnology, genetic engineering, new businesses that can be developed here. And it's the role of the state and other entities that we develop the Inovaqua Center for new technology. And then we're going to have a complete package to attract investors and investments here for our state. Yeah, that's great. But unfortunately, fishing, since we're talking about the ocean, we're talking about waters that belong to the federal government. So it's always been dealt with at the federal level. And what we've been able to do, and Governor Camilo has helped us in this sense, to change this traditional way of thinking, because these are fishermen, communities, it's a whole society from Ceará that's benefiting from these resources. And so, fishing is quite spread out. There's a tiny little community, a little village of fishermen. That's where they live, that's where they get their livelihood, and who has access to this are the municipalities. It's the state and not only the federal government. So that's why we need to come up with records, and we need to register and record things. So it's important the involvement of a network of coastal municipalities that can work with the state to consolidate this information, social and economic information. And so we need to know this better, these fishing communities, so that the state can compile the municipal data and that many states can offer this to the federal government. And the federal government will have a greater snapshot of what is going on and can develop better public policies based on reliable data and not based on estimates. Quite often, we're very distant from the reality. And so I always call the attention of mayors and the state government that they need to be more involved in these campaigns that we organize. So another thing that's always controversial, but we need to think about this. I started talking about the traditional fishing rafts, the jangada, where they go to areas that aren't so far from the coast. They're for reproduction, and we need a society involving the communities and leadership. We need to concentrate on this problem. What can we do? Like Felipe is talking about the necessary reforms, this turning point, because otherwise you lose out on competitive conditions. It's difficult to look at the market to give something back to society if it exploits all resources. And so we need to look at the characteristics of the fleets, not only lobster, but others. Even the curral technique, we can evolve, we can obtain better products, regular products, in order not to have social implications. Not only looking at the poor fisherman, but a professional with the help of the state. And it's interesting to look at it this way. You look at other places in the world, where the fishermen are quite proud. They do that with pride and not as subsistence, as if they're receiving, just help. So I think different governments need to get involved. But of course, this needs to come from the federal government. The federal government needs to come in agreement with the state government and the state government with its municipalities. Okay, well, our time, unfortunately, is up. This is an excellent talk, very productive debate talking about fishing and aquaculture. So I'd just like to thank all of you and the organizers of the event, and that we can meet again in the future to continue debating this important issue. Thank you very much, and we'll see you later on. Thank you very much. Bye-bye. Thank you, everyone.
Grande prazer. Abraço.
Muito obrigado, Bartolomeu. Abraço, Felipe. Abraço.
Abraço.